to Disaster. Our guest today is Tennis Wick. Tennis Wick is the former Permit Sonoma Building Department Director for several years. He is now in private practice with a company called Four Leaf. Tennis is somebody that I've known since 2013, about 4 years before our disasters, and I had the pleasure of working with him in the public sector before the fires came. And then after I left the county and started on this nonprofit, I have many times called upon Tennis to be my sounding board and to come along with us. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation on leadership, creativity, and how to lead after a disaster. Welcome, Tennis Wick, to How to Disaster.
Hey, good to see you, Jennifer.
Good to see you too. So I said a little bit about it in the intro, but I've known Tennis, since I think 2013, so about 12 years now, when I started working in the county of Sonoma, and he became the permit and building department director at that time. And so we worked together for about 4.5 years before the fires. Side note, after the fire, I immediately tried to go work for Tennis and be his ombudsman. And he very foolishly passed up that amazing opportunity because all of this drive could have gone into, his department. But whatever, no hard feelings.
How could we ever fit you in a bureaucracy? It just, no.
Do you think I would have been an HR issue? I don't know. Certainly not a bigger one than you. So let's just be honest. But that's okay. I didn't take it too personally. It ended up working out beautifully. And one of the nice things is that we were able to work together in my new position when I became executive director of Rebuild North Bay Foundation. But also, as the years went on, I was able to talk to Tennis. I was able to get his counsel. But then we had the very fortunate opportunity when the terrible fires in Maui happened, that Tennis was one of the first people that I knew I wanted to come with us on our first delegation. And since then, he's been back there with us several times. I'm actually not sure of the number. And then he's also been to LA with us several times too, because he was immediately, of course, first on my list, not just for the delegations, but also for the webinars and the other needs that they had. So we have a personal relationship. It's lovely. He has since retired kind of from the county, but shifted into private practice. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to start at not the beginning of our lovely friendship, but instead the beginning of your understanding of megafire and what were we doing here. Take us through 2017, October 8th.
Just to back up for listeners, for viewers, when I came into this position, it was my fourth coastal county. And at the bottom of the contract, there's something called disaster service worker, that everybody checks the box and says, yeah, of course, I'll abide by the terms and conditions without really understanding the import of what that is. Because 10 days after I started my job in Sonoma County was my first exposure to being in emergency operations when there was a tragic killing of a young man that resulted in social unrest. Mm-hmm. So here I was in a bunker with a bunch of first responders trying to understand the community's grief and anger, and hopefully bring it to rest with the government service. And from there into earthquakes and floods and the ranch fire of 2015, when we had major parts of our geothermal facility, the largest one in the world, destroyed and had to be rebuilt quickly. But nothing really prepared us for the 2017 fire. That was of a scale that, as we've talked about, started at our own homes when you get woken up in the middle of the night and you're told to come immediately. And I'm passing out of my neighborhood and going through fistfights at a gas station while there's a stream of traffic coming from the West County through to the urban part of the county in a mass evacuation with smoke all around, and getting to the bunker and experiencing the chaos that was going on in there as people were just trying to settle into their roles and understand the enormity of what was happening to us as it was happening to us all around us.
And several people at the county lost their homes and were called to be disaster responders at the same time. I
Yeah,
know that
people on my team.
right. So what was that like? I mean, how did you navigate that
Oh,
with your team?
to this day, um, those are the people I'm in touch with on a regular basis. And I think about people like Darla Pimlett, who lost her house, and she didn't skip a beat. She came in. She made sure her daughter was taken care of by by her parents, and just came to work and threw herself into it. She lives in Coffee Park,
Mm.
so um, that just set a tone for everybody else on the team. It's like, oh, Darla's just left everything, and she's here with us. Um, that this is important. We have to settle down and make sure that we're doing our jobs well.
So, for those who are not familiar, maybe this is the first time they've tuned in, the numbers for the overall North Bay complex fires, because most people only think of the Tubbs fires, about 8,900 structures across 4 counties. In Sonoma County, about 5,900, split between the city and the county. It was nobody had ever seen it on that scale before, so we were very shocked by it, and we were full of grief and shock and trauma, and we're all still doing this to some extent. Probably is
Yeah.
a little bit of a trauma response, but it really was sort of stunning. And we'd seen a little bit 2 years earlier, 2015, with the Valley Fire in Middletown, and so we had like some idea, but I just remember watching it on TV and going, that looks terrible, really scary. And then I went on with my life, right? So, but not for too long, apparently, about 2 years. So you then had to learn the landscape of actually how to recover or rebuild or even like clean up or respond to a megafire. Can you talk to us about some of those early lessons and how the learning process of who you were talking to and how you navigated that?
Yeah, I think as a local building or permitting shop, um, we had a clientele. We were at that time in 2017, the interest rates were low, business was high. We would normally have 150 people a day coming through our permit center. It's kind of a one-stop permit shop.
Mhm.
Uh, when we reopened the doors after the fire, I think our first day we had 450 people. So a lot of owner and builders in an infill development type of community, um, but quadruple the number of people we are used to seeing. Uh, and like a lot of places post fire, it was a place where people were used to coming. If you were in the trades, it was kind of an informal social center, not just a place of business. Uh, so we had to maintain that and then also be ready for the anger and grief that people had. I remember this one gentleman, probably my father's age, a veteran, wearing his hat and waiting to get in line for records. And obviously, very proud man, and he just broke down. And so his wife continued with the business they were there for, and the county surveyor, great gentleman, Gabe Gabrielson, came forward, took him quietly in the back, and consoled him, so he could again join his wife. So, and then there were people who were inconsolable and who were angry, and so much of our time was just dealing with people and their individual grief and the way they would express it, whether just talking about something that had nothing to do with rebuilding or people who were angry at the government in general and everything in between. So as a local permit shop, that changed the way we had to see our clientele was now the general public, not just our regular customers. And building shops then become kind of a focal point for measuring recovery because what we do in a great part of our work is very quantifiable. So the measure of success of a community in this recovery became the dashboards that we created to have online to literally measure that success. Uh, And that's something I think you and I've talked about. That's only one component of
Yeah.
community success. There's a whole cultural and political um, and social recovery that goes on that you can't put on a dashboard.
You can't.
But
But the dashboard, though, gives you some transparency. But I think if people aren't searching for that information, it actually can open up the conversation or leave more room for talking about the other areas that need to go into recovery. One of the things that we're seeing in Los Angeles right now is there's just a lack of transparency across. Like there isn't like, finally, we have a philanthropy has actually taken the lead to put everything onto one dashboard. Like today it happened. And we've been really encouraging them to please have it combined like you did with Santa Rosa so that we could look at the whole thing at once and then we could see who's in process, who's waiting on who's waiting because for whatever reason they're not doing it. So it's one of the things that we really hope that LA turns the corner on this one because it's been a point of frustration because it becomes the only measure of success. And you're like, you can get there. It's like when people ask us about Lahaina and they say, oh, why haven't they totally rebuilt? I'm like, they could have done it in a year and a half with rectangles, like white boxes up and down every street in Lahaina and Tech Bros. If it was just about rebuilding, that's one thing. But if you're rebuilding and your measure of success for Maui is, did we get our Ohana home? Then you wouldn't be successful if all you did was put bodies and buildings on a megafire site. So I appreciate that so much, that period of it.
well, listening to you recount that reminds me that every setting in disaster response and recovery is different. In Sonoma County, we had the typical local rivalries of bureaucracy with the unincorporated and county and the city of Santa Rosa. Fortunately, personal relationships allowed us to really erase a good deal of those and rely on them and the friendship we have for each other through this day to do something extraordinary. That we are a county of 500,000 people, so middling size. Then to translate that to metropolitan Los Angeles, one of the largest communities in the nation, that's
4 million.
wonderfully complicated. It's the challenge there is so much different on an organizational level. So I understand, as you know, we're there in Malibu and the county of LA, so we see the differences that everyone's trying to overcome in order to provide that effective recovery. And to your point in Lahaina, it is probably the most complicated political, cultural, environmental setting in which to conduct a recovery. So, it takes time to get through all that. And a fire brought to bear so much of those complications that people had dealt with to some degree, that now all that was stripped away. It was extraordinary. I love working there too.
Oh, I love it's for so many of us, or at least the core group of us that have been working there consistently for 2.5 years. It becomes such a labor of love. It's personal, and we just did our 2.5 year Maui report post fire, and I was just like, I just think they have so much to be proud of, and I don't know that they see all of it yet. But there are big things around leadership from all the sectors, from like absolute grassroots activism to philanthropy to, and then of course to the leadership of Rick Bisson, the mayor. To start
Amazing
back on your
guy.
heels, right? To start like be from behind. Because they had 102 people die and it was a terrible fire and they were not prepared. And for him then to move into, yes, and we have to own this. Like we have to own what happened here. So it will never happen again like that. We're going to eat it basically in the ways that we should and be humble before it. I think is really one of his superpowers, which makes me want to ask you about how. So we have a building director, somebody works in a municipality and they're listening to this and they're like, oh, what and how do you deal with electeds? because became a big thing in Sonoma County. Like, what do you do with the Board of Supervisors, for example, but also some of the city council, those people, because they are elected, but they're not necessarily qualified emergency managers, and they're not always aware of that.
Well, I need to say that Richard Bisson's the most extraordinary public official with whom I've ever worked. In 46 years of practice, that man impresses me every day.
Every day.
Whether I'm on island or tracking progress through our own organization or through social media. So thank you, Mayor Bisson.
Thank you for that. Mahalo for that, honestly, because I think people think that I might just be biased because we have an affection for him because he is such a gifted leader and he's such a stellar human being.
Yeah.
And the people in his administration want to follow him because of how he is and how he walks through the world. And I wish I could have everybody take a class from Rick Bisson in how to disaster, how to be a leader post disaster in an elected position.
How to be a public servant.
Damn, right?
Yeah. So as far as electeds and emergency response and recovery, I think during my evolution as a emergency operations leader, we had such a great team that evolved in its own expertise, unfortunately, over a number of disasters, floods and fires in particular. At first, it started in a very disorganized fashion, and there was a culture of nobody goes inside the emergency operations center, but it's staff only. And I think we grew to appreciate that there needs to be effective communication between that team and elected officials. So eventually, it really came to a single point of contact within emergency operations and within the political leadership. So there was effective, quick communication. So they had as much situational awareness as we could verifiably give them. And back, there was a resistance to elected officials communicating with the public, which frankly I found extremely arrogant on the part of some of my colleagues within the emergency operations framework. That's their job in a democracy. And I think we came to realize that if we gave them information that was tested and true, they were the most effective leaders. And Linda Hopkins is a perfect example of someone who broke through that.
Supervisor Linda Hopkins, West County, Sonoma County. Yeah.
Another one of my favorite electeds to this day, who is so effective in and represents a very rural part of Sonoma County, knows it down to the square inch, knows every person out there. She is not only a great communicator, but as so many elected officials are, also someone who just knows the network that's so important for getting the word out in communities. And, we see the same thing and the same struggle in Los Angeles, in Maui, when it came to parts of the island where, that fire had touched, but not as severely as Lahaina, and in nonprofit groups like After the Fire that provide that linkage to find that gap. So
I will say, because I can say it even if you can't say it, I think that I learned a lot about leadership during our fires, and I think I learned a lot about my own, but also others, and what could work and what maybe was a trauma response, but not as effective post-disaster for people who were in really important positions, particularly electeds. And we had those who were curious, super curious, and they were humbled before it, which I think is very important, to be curious, humbled, and then willing too. And then there were others who were like, I'm afraid to admit that I don't know how to deal with this. And instead of saying that and leaning into it, because I'm afraid that the public will eat me alive, which, to be fair, they were cannibalizing the leadership for sure. There's a lot of screaming, totally understand that. But you have to move through that. But who were more afraid, so they contracted and became defensive. And so it's always been interesting that in every fire we've walked into, and every set of leaders that I've worked with,
Sure.
I see some measure of that same mix every single time. How do you move? Do you have any advice on how to move a leader from that contracted space of self-defense and bravado? That's how you also get bad communication and bad information. But what do you do? Any advice?
Yeah, a couple of things, especially if you're in an administrative role, um, or it could be a community role too. Um, be honest with yourselves. You've been awake for days.
Mm-hmm.
You're exhausted. Be honest with the magnitude of what's happened, and be ready for change, because the way you've done things before isn't really going to be helpful for what you have to do in the future. If there's ever something that should shake you to your core and make you change, and be humble to say, if I don't know, I'm going to find out how to do it. And I can't just do what I did yesterday. It's a natural disaster recovery.
And it's hard, and then also the different stages of it. I think one of the things that I'm happy for, which is an odd term, but for other communities, is at least now there's a big network of people and leaders who've gone through it, and they are just unfailingly generous with their time and with their advice and their support, even for the long term. We always say that in a disaster, people don't reach for binders that much. Like in theory, they do before, but what they're really doing is they reach for people, and it's the people who can actually tell them. And that's why so much of our work is dedicated to bringing the people that we think are really good to other communities, or making them available like you, so that we don't have to monitor that conversation. What we're saying is, this person's going to give you some gems and a lot of compassion and understanding for what you're going through, but also they're going to be there for you in a month and a year and in 2 years. But then we're going to ask that leader to come along with us to the next one, when we do find those gems. But I think it's surprising for people going through the disaster, for the general public, that their leaders don't know more, or that that every gap is not filled, or that the system of recovery and response to disaster isn't a tighter mesh. I thought it was going to be. I thought all these people must know what they're doing. Yeah.
Here in California, we went through the progressive era where we structurally changed government and decentralized things to have all these checks and balances, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But when it comes to response and recovery to a natural disaster, it challenges us, because we run into all these checks at a time when we're trying to go a lot faster, and when the magnitude of the work is so much greater. So the good thing in California is our way of respecting that structure and yet being able to be responsive is mutual aid. And with mutual aid, the Office of Emergency Services and the Governor's Office, and particularly CAL FIRE, are the best in the world.
Yep.
We have the best fire service in the world, and they do much more than just fire service for us.
Yes,
they are an amazing group of men and women. And I would say to my colleagues, public and private sector, reach out to us. That service is out there to partner with you and support you. And when you do, they have a framework that you can use. You don't have to go through this alone. It's becoming a much even tighter group with technology and experience. So make use of it.
It really is a beautiful network out there. And there's this whole layer and strata of like building directors, and then Cal OES, people like Paul Lowenthal, the Santa Rosa assistant chief and fire marshal, and people like you who actually operate inside of the EOC or oversee that. And then there's a group of whole community people who will walk you through those pieces too. So do take advantage of it. If we could give a shout out to CAL FIRE LNU, Lake Sonoma Napa Unit, because not only is CAL FIRE the most elite wildfire agency in the world, they're also, I think CAL FIRE LNU is easily the most experienced in that most elite agencies. So, and they're our home ones. So we want to give them extra love because we appreciate them so much. When a disaster destroys thousands of homes, what does a building department suddenly become that people may not understand? Now, I know that you talked about the emotional side of it, but I also was there at the county and I saw that you had set up trailers outside, I think within 2 or 3 weeks.
So it's something that magnifies the role of a permitting shop in a community. So yes, we're part of the regulatory world. I don't know anybody that loves getting permits, but they understand its role in an economy and in a governance. Um, After a major disaster like a fire, it quickly becomes a focus of, especially in a time like 2017, uh, when the economy is really in a growth pace. You need to maintain your regular business and respond to the recovery. And as we all found out, those are two different populations. There's the need to maintain the economic tempo with the trades and the people that are working on properties that were not directly impacted by the fire. And then there's the needs of fire survivors who've lost everything. They've lost their identity, their driver's license, their birth certificate, their passport, and everything in their home.
Their sense of security,
Right.
And who knows if they were insured or not insured.
All those things.
All of those things factor
So
into
it became very evident that after that first day that I described earlier, when we had over 400 people come in, having those two different types of customers come through the door made plain that we needed to have a physically different environment to effectively support both. So with the board's permission, we set up 5 trailers outside. And each one represented the different steps that they would need to go through. So we had one trailer that was completely dedicated to space where people could come in. A typical customer coming into the agency would maybe need 20 minutes to take them through the permitting process, get them started. A fire survivor might take 2 hours or 4 hours because he wanted to tell you about what happened to him.
Yeah.
He had to get through that before he could talk about his next step. So you
talk about that though, like lean into that a little bit, because it also means you have to prepare and train your employees to do
you
it.
have to hire different people.
That is where I wanted you to go with this. Leading the witness. Thank you. Talk about it.
So making sure that that person who, with some irony, is called a permit technician is actually a permit compassionate, that they have that personality and being that from the moment you sit down with them, you can have all the comfortable furniture as we did in the trailer that was more like coming into someone's living room. But if you didn't have the right kind of person in that setting, it wouldn't matter. And it was just beautiful to go out there and see people that are eating a candy bar, having a cup of coffee, and really it's a conversation with our greeter, who is actually a permit technician, and taking notes on technical things, but also taking notes on what this person needed outside of just a permit that we could possibly help with. That was beautiful. And then how to take that later into the agency and improve service, which occurred over time, not as quickly as I would have hoped, but it happened. And it was as a public administrator at the time, I literally was in a shop watching progress happening out in the trailers, and people getting to first plan check in 5 days, and people inside the shop getting to first plan check in 5 months, and getting to ask myself, why is that happening?
Yeah.
We had already started process improvements internally, but that really laid bare where we were and where we needed to be.
I mean, it's really astonishing. Like we were speaking earlier about how people do measure it's the boxes on the ground and the houses and how that's just one portion of recovery.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so important that when people like try that for many fire survivors, their own personal journey of recovery is that house. And that is their measure of how they're doing, and sometimes they're surprised after they're all the way home that they have lingering feelings or unresolved trauma that they have to address. And and I think they're also sometimes surprised that you're never the same as the day before. And I think I appreciate so much the approach also because it's like you had a lot of models for how to do this when you were setting up and when the city of Santa Rosa was setting up. And I feel like you each took very similar paths, trajectories to
Very
solve it.
purposely.
Talk about that, because that's not always easy for a city and a county to coordinate that way.
No, and there are a lot of late night conversations because we were on 12-hour shifts, and during the nighttime shift it could be very active, but sometimes slower. And David Guin, now county executive, then
Yeah.
Section chief for plans for the city. Paul Lowenthal and I knew each other before.
I just wanted to note that David Guin, I'm very happy that he's now the county CAO. He was the person who suggested to us that we do the Hopper Avenue walls, and he laid it all out for a map for me and explained everything and why it was one of these orphan projects that was super unsexy. So I just want to thank him for that because it would not have occurred to me, but shout out to David Guin.
So we recognize that from our practice that people might say they're from Santa Rosa. Most people don't know if they're in a city limit or in the larger community of Santa Rosa. So we thought, okay, that's the way, stepping outside of our roles and to the community and looking back in at the government, they're going to come to one website. And so we designed and structured that way, which is extraordinary for bureaucracies. And then at some point, when they answered a series of questions, it would then take them to either the city or the county websites that would help them get more information for their particular needs that had to be tailored to the laws of each jurisdiction. But we started with one. We set up a local assistance center that had both agencies staffed in it, that had childcare, that had people from the State Department for passports, people from the Department of Motor Vehicles for driver's licenses, insurance people there, insurance advocates there, other nonprofits. So all present. And that was one of the things that I think we should all be proud of as a community, because while the fire was still going on, we had people coming out of the center. They went in. It might take as much as 4 hours, but they came in. They had their credentials again. Mm-hmm. They had contact with insurance companies. They had contact with the Building Trades Association, and they had records for their property. They went in with nothing, and they came out with a lot more than they had.
It's one of the reasons
on that path to rebuilding.
It's true. There's a lot of paperwork involved. I'm hoping we can cut down on that for people. But after our fires, we started buying backpacks for new fire communities, because something to note, if you are new to this, they're going to need something to carry along all of their papers. There is a group, I think it's called Out of the Ashes, that actually makes those accordion. They pre-label all of the accordion files for fire survivors.
How daddish.
It's such a cool thing to do, though, because it's like it just takes off this tremendous thing, but also keeps you organized from the beginning. So if anyone's listening to this and they're like, what things can I do immediately for my community should this happen? I think that's definitely one of the things. And bear in mind, the 4 hours would also include FEMA, SBA. It would include federal agencies as well. And so they were doing. Sometimes they're called a DAC, a Disaster Assistance Center, and sometimes they're called a LAC, a Local Assistance Center. So we're trying to, demystify the whole process. The level of creativity that is required, but also can be a bit of an art form that is attending to a disaster and recovery. And the level of collaboration that you may not have done prior to the fires. So can you speak to the creativity? And one of the things I'm going to want to say to you is I'm going to lead the witness here too. For example, when somebody comes to you and says, we're going to build a mile of common fencing, but we don't want a mile of like 45 permits, right? Like, what do you do? Like all the constant creativity. So can you talk about that and then things you did to try to simplify it for the fire survivors?
Yeah, so that fence was a great example of changing a bureaucratic mindset. And thanks to Patrick, our ombudsperson at the time, for
Love.
helping. Yeah, for helping out here. So we had a community in Larkfield, Wickiup, that had a number of homes, including Paul Lowenthal's, that bordered along a major road where they needed, for privacy and sound purposes, needed a fence. And these are people that in our limited budget didn't have the money to go through the individual permitting that were required, because most people put the fence a little bit on their side of the property line, and that requires a permit for each property for the type of fence they wanted to build. And we wanted something that would be, so as this issue came up from the group of property owners that had, this was what, about 20, 25 fences.
I think it was 40.
Was it that long?
$490,000 was the cost. The
Gotcha.
end. I think it was 42.
It was also people wanting to do something that was relatively uniform and attractive as they started grappling with how to solve this problem. And Patrick and I started talking about it and said, well, if they just move the fence a little bit outside of property lines and into the right of way, we could issue one encroachment permit on the government's dime. And that would give them the type of fence they wanted. They could put the money into the fence itself instead of into the permit. And it was an example of, small as it might have been, of showing not only the property owners that, look, we're here to help you, but also getting a part of the bureaucracy to think about how you solve a problem instead of just identifying barriers, which is so much of what we do as humans, whether we're part of a government or any kind of organization. We'll start with, oh, here's the reason why you can't do that, instead of how you can do something. It is such an important shift in approach that we all need to take.
Hi, girls. Here we are at the Palibu Recovery Expo in the middle of May, and I found two powerful ladies. Many of you podcast listeners will remember my friend Mel, who rescued me and my dog Ace on the day of the fire after 5 hours and didn't know where to go or how to do it. She saved us. Thank you, Mel. And she's a FEMA certified animal rescuer. And this beautiful woman, who are you, miss?
I'm Dana Wolf Phillips, and I'm part of the Community Brigade.
Okay, so what is the Community Brigade and why should we care?
The Community Brigade is a group of volunteers. We are your neighbors, and we are wildfire educated, and we will come to your house and help you do an assessment around your house and figure out how to harden your home. And we are all about education and preparedness and how you can take some of that risk to prepare yourself for an event ahead of the event and be ready for when, inevitably, a wildfire comes.
In wildfire country.
In wildfire country. What we like to say is wildfires are inevitable, but destruction doesn't have to be, and community destruction doesn't have to be. And that is all about preparedness and hardening your home, which is very unsexy, but it is very necessary.
So, Mel, why is it so important to have community brigades, in your opinion?
I think it is so important to have the community brigade because I'll tell you why. Because you can effectively reduce the trauma and loss that these wildfires bring through preparation, planning, and I'm going to say redesign, because the current design is not structured and the system's not set up to successfully endure the next wildfire. So I think these home hardening assessments are incredibly critical, because it's one thing when you have one home with defensible space, but now imagine a block with defensible space. Now take that block and move it to the WUI, or the first line of defense, and that first row of homes has ember-protected vents, home hardening. You are, in fact, slowing the fire down. And while you might not be able to stop it, slowing the fire down allows responders to move more effectively.
And
So I think these organizations and their volunteers are hypercritical
essential.
to these neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And
you
Mel is not yet part of the community brigade, but I would like to say that answer was so good.
Thank you.
You should.
But
I've clearly done your homework. And the idea is that we are neighbors, and we are educating our neighbors, educating ourselves, and educating the community. And so that we can all understand and feel like we have some sort of empowerment in an area where we might not feel like we are empowered.
and this is stronger together, truly.
Yes.
Truly. And you said something to me. I was like, oh my God, I always leave early if there's any puff of smoke. And you said the next time what?
The next time you see a fire, you will be a lot more comfortable. Meaning, for me, the first time I saw fire was actually Franklin Fire, when I saw it that close to my community and to myself. And the second time I saw it was Palisades, and I was able to, instead of having a fight or flight response, I was able to pull up a little bit more of my amygdala and have a little bit more of a normal response, because I know where that fire is headed. I can have situational awareness. I know what the weather is doing on a red flag day. I'm very aware of that. That's part of, knowing when there is a wind event and preparing for that. I've prepared my home prior to a wind event coming. You get a lot of notice for that. That's why we get notice, because you can have a plan. I have a ready, set, go plan. And that is written down on paper in my phone and written down all over my house. And that plan is easily executed by anybody who can walk up to my house. Let's say if I ask someone to go there and prepare the plan, they can open up one cabinet. It's all right there and do it.
Oh my God.
Well,
And
that's actually really important, because having these plans, and I'm sorry to interrupt, because this is also the same thing with animals and having go bags. You have to kind of think about your home and these plans. You're creating maps for people that respond. You're creating a map because she couldn't get home from work one day, but her neighbor was able to. So she says, look into the cupboard and everything's going to be there. It's a map. It's effective. It's easy. It's accessible. Again, time is your most limited resource. It's your greatest resource. And you have to take it seriously. And it's the same thing with animals. You have to have a laminated cover as to what your animal looks like. Are there behavioral issues with your animal? What does the medicine look like? Because
Contact
information. And obviously you go into more detail about that, but you need to make it easy for people that are coming to help you.
And also, in my neighborhood, nobody was prepared. A 91-year-old woman who was pretty agile had to find out the code from her neighbor and rescue the neighbor's 2 dogs.
That's right.
And so the other point is, you both are women. Isn't there scary fire stuff that only guys should do? What made you have the balls to get involved?
Well, after Woolsey, my house did not burn down, and I always wondered why. And I wanted to understand why the fire stopped where it stopped. We got lucky, but why it stopped where it stopped, how that worked, and how we could better prepare next time. And so I joined the brigade. Also, my pitch, if you know Keegan Gibbs, who started the brigade, my pitch to him was that he also needed somebody different who didn't necessarily want to go out and fight fire, but who wanted to do everything else for him and help him be really organized. And during the Franklin fire, we figured that out, right? I was able to go with him in his car, help him track where everybody was in real time, keep us all safe. And so that is what I continue to do with the brigade. I am wildfire trained, but typically you will not see me on the end of a hose. What you will see me doing is helping with everything else. There are a ton of logistics, a ton of field operations that need to get done, and helping in making sure everybody gets where they need to go and we know where everybody is and that they're safe and they have all the right supplies and all the right things, and that takes a lot of work.
What would you say to women about the choice to either panic, have fear, either freeze, or be educated, get to know what to do, and be empowered? What's your advice?
I think my take on that is whether you're a woman, a man,
A
male,
child.
female, whatever you are, you have a duty at this point to be prepared. I think when you run drills and learn and choose to sit down and educate, in the moment of chaos, you resort to your plan, and that plan will keep you calm. In the Woolsey fire, I went in untrained, didn't know a thing about fire, didn't really know a thing about animals at the time. I made a lot of mistakes. I saw a lot of gaps. I made a lot of mistakes. When I look back now, those mistakes came because I was moving too quickly. And I was nervous and moving too quickly. I focused on that gap. I focused on those mistakes. And I got the proper training. I responded to every other fire. In the Palisades fire, in your Eaton fire, in every other fire since the Woolsey fire, my response has been calm, collected. I know the plans work. I've used them before. I know the team members I can rely on and count on, and I can trust. And again, preparedness is not perfection, but it's being responsible and putting the effort in. Whether you are a daughter with an aging parent or a kid with an aging parent, you have to have those conversations now. Delay is one of those save now, pay later schemes. I think that, you educate your children, and I think this is not spoken about enough. Every child in Malibu and every child in Topanga and in the Palisades, they live in wildfire country.
Yes, be
Talk to
real.
them about go bags. Have the conversation. So when the next fire comes,
Which it
it's
will.
not as traumatic. And I think our goal here is, again, we're not going to stop the fires, but we have to be able to reduce the trauma and the loss. And the only way we do that is through the work before the fire. That's it. I think my point to that whole thing is that you also have a role to play.
Everyone has
And
a
everyone's got a role. And you have to start assuming that responsibility. It's not the mayor's fault. It's not the mayor's responsibility to make sure you leave with your animals.
role. Or that your home is prepared, because
Yeah, and that your home's prepared.
so
that's
listen,
free will.
ladies, I could talk to you all day, but I'm just so tickled to see how you represent this cause, this education, this empowering. And I can't thank you enough. And please keep it up, okay?
Thank you for giving us women a shot.
I think that I think for the people who are especially who are learning and how to do disaster, you realize that what is the outcome that you're looking for? And you can start from there and then reverse engineer. So the outcome you're looking for is so that people who are rebuilding their homes now have this one important piece sort of done for them by the community, which is also really important for their mental health, that they get care and compassion in the form of visual deliverables of progress and hope. And that's what was carrying us through. And it was a complicated fence. Like the right of way was in a ditch. It was at the bottom of a watershed. It was complicated. So it had to be done correctly, but it would have been so much more expensive and not as attractive as it ended up being. But it was really that piece of you guys coming to the table and like pushing it all the way through, so that was like one thing we didn't have to worry about and something that we could give them.
And it became fun. So people didn't come at it. If you were the permit people, oh, there's the people that literally set up the regulatory barriers for us. And people come to you in a more defensive approach. And it becomes all of a sudden a lot more complicated and difficult to solve the problem. But if you bring it as a solution and you're willing to move from your position and make it fun, what did we do after the fence was done? We had a party.
Yeah.
That community now has a party after everything, and it's wonderful. Even Paul has fun at them.
Oh my God, Paul is actually very fun. He's hilarious. And then Brad Sherwood just moved out of that neighborhood, but they were, he worked for the water agency, so that was actually great too. He's the one who actually approached us saying, "Would you do this fence?" And I said no. So that's why it's done, because it was Brad, and because you all made it so much easier that it also didn't take nonprofit dollars out of our pockets to pay for a bunch of permits. The other thing that I would like them to know is that these two neighborhoods, much like Coffee Park, were so exposed after the fire and for months thereafter that people were driving by as disaster tourists so they could stare at people who were crying over the loss of everything. Yeah. And it was just, to be fair, the scale of it was unprecedented. Nobody had really seen that before. So their curiosity was understood, but they were not, they just were not very sensitive to how painful it would be to be laid bare of everything that you'd ever carried from your home, from the time you left home and brought your babies home, and losing it all and just needing time to mourn. And one of the letters that we got after the fence was up was, "Thank you, because we have our privacy back too." And that was something that I felt like the county really did understand and wanted to step up for those communities.
And it's true. And it set a good example for what we could do on more complicated things, like getting people off of septic systems and onto sewer in that very same neighborhood, and if you're going to be on sewer, very different for people on our housing team. I had them cold call the apartment owners in the area and say, "Hey, we're gonna set up a system with you to get you on sewer that will allow you to finance the cost of that connection fee. And as you do that, we would like you to build more housing, and we will put you first in line for permitting if you do this. If you have a mutual water company that has really antiquated infrastructure, most of which was destroyed in the fire, we want you to consolidate with other mutual water companies or come in to the regional water service." So it really led to modernizing infrastructure that led to more housing.
And just the modernizing infrastructure opportunity is huge for people to really, really think about that, because, people want back what they had before, after, but since the day before is gone and we can't do anything about that, we always encourage communities to then dream and reimagine. Yes. And you can correct things that were going wrong before. You can.
Such a good example you said. So what we often hear in communities where we serve after a disaster is we only want people, the bureaucratic response is, you get to build back what you had before, but nothing more. And I think to your point is, you can't build back what you had before. What you had before is gone. You have to accept that you are going to have a new community. It may have attributes of the past. It may hopefully have the cultural components, but you're not going to have the same physical environment. In fact, in the environment we're in now, you have a 25% increase or a 50% increase in construction costs. Mm-hmm. The cost of money is, in some cases, double what it was before the disaster. So you have to think, and you have an increased housing crisis. So why would you hold people back from building additional units on their property if today's code allows it? You need to just release those strictures of whatever psychologically is making you adhere to some bureaucratic past that has nothing to do with the future your community wants.
You know what that reminded me of and what brought up, and I think I've abandoned all of my written questions, so whatever, we're just going to leave that behind, is the number of people who came to me, there are really a lot of NIMBYs actually over a number of years who came to me and they said, "Jen, we want you to help us to prevent this affordable housing unit going in near me." And then they would invariably say, oh, I love affordable housing, but not there. And so it turns out that there was always near them. And they would want me to come and tell them, they'd want me to testify or go to a city council meeting or whatever it was to say, oh, you shouldn't allow that because then people will not be able to evacuate. So how do you balance those sort of protests against there is a real need to be able to evacuate? I would always be very happy to take those calls so I could explain to them all the reasons why they were not right and that it's fine to have people without means living near you. Don't have cooties, they don't have moral cooties either.
Right.
But they also you can put provisions into the plan, right? Like what happens in a disaster in an evacuation zone and you have a senior affordable housing. Can you talk about dealing with that tension?
Certainly. It's human nature for people to have the reaction that you just described. So as a professional serving in these communities, whether I'm a consultant or whether I was a government official, the role is really the same. And that's to practice the same patience and compassion and explain to people, because this paradigm that we're trying to shift away from has been with us for generations. We cannot expect people or our communities or our society to just change overnight because not everyone has gone through the same experience in the same fashion. So we have to, as professionals, take the time to sit and explain to people why that accessory dwelling unit needs to go on that property. And it will probably involve a different approach depending on the person and how receptive they appear to be. But it's important as us as professionals to take the time, be compassionate, be patient, and explain it. And accept that you may not get to yes with everybody or to acceptance with everybody. And that's okay. Then just move on.
Are there provisions that the people can put in their conditions of approval that help with evacuation zones and higher density areas? Because that's often what they're worried about, even when it doesn't necessarily apply to that area. I'm thinking of Siesta Way, for example, that there's an affordable housing unit there in Boys Hot Springs, and it's for seniors. And there was a lot of pushback on that for this very reason. But you can ask the developers or the management company to have a bus there, that you don't have to have, 100 cars, things like that.
Even its location. So Siesta Way is a street in Sonoma Valley, who are maybe familiar with our county. But its location is the most, and its density at that location are the most important thing. And this is going on around the state. So we purposely, in our housing element, located higher density housing at that location, because even though it was on a feeder or an arterial street, it was right near Highway 12, the main thoroughfare for that series of communities in Sonoma Valley. So from an evacuation standpoint, they were as close to the main thoroughfare as possible. And we are all going through that now with the designations of high fire area and wildland urban interface, so that as we are locating future housing in California, we are all tasked with being strategic in where we're locating future housing and the density of that housing, not at the top of the watershed, at the bottom of the watershed on major thoroughfares, and then planning accordingly for it. I see disaster response and recovery now coming to us in Four Leaf as we respond to proposals. We were just in an interview with the city of Menifee yesterday, as an example. In their questions was, how do you take into account building inspections, and are your people trained? And with some pride, we explained that our building inspectors are all certified for working in fire response and recovery, have experience doing that, have an excellent relationship with CAL FIRE, so that we can be in early and identify those sites so we can get into recovery faster. But we also, in our practice with our housing team, work with communities with our experience in disaster work, in our civilian work of making sure that housing locations have the least amount of risk exposure possible and focusing density there.
I'm glad that you just did a shift a little bit, and so you moved from from a long career in the public sector, and which you'd been in the private sector before, and then the public sector, and then you moved to a private contractor, Four Leaf. And as a side note, like, we're pretty careful about private companies, but there are some companies who are the most experienced, and we're really looking for the best services, the best technologies, the best ideas, the best innovators. We're always searching for the people that we think are the best at what they do. And so I have no qualms about saying this about Four Leaf, that I do believe that they are the best at what they do. So can you talk about your shift from the public sector into the private sector, what you've learned and what you want the audience to know?
Yeah, sure. It's funny. I was just talking with another client about this yesterday. I'm 65. This is my last lap in my professional life. I could have retired financially. We have 4 daughters and a raft of grandchildren. They were the first to say, "Oh, for goodness sake, please don't retire. You've got too much." And I think there was some sarcasm, but there was also some genuine direction that, "Dad, you've got more left." And so I had the grace of being able to pick where I wanted to go. And I had so much experience with this company in servicing County of Sonoma, and then watched what it did in Maui, what it did in Jackson County in Oregon, what it did in Paradise, what it did in Butte County, and other communities, that I was itching to do that work, the work I'm doing today. I've never been more fortunate to be with a group of creative, just kick-ass people.
Compassionate, competent.
Yeah,
a lot of C's in there, but it's true, though.
And now a whole new generation of planners and other building professionals that really start from a place of solving a problem, identifying a goal, of moving fast. It's really a joy to be on the inside of an organization like this. And it's gratifying to see our customers and putative customers identifying the need. It's not just about, it's not going to happen to us. People are like people in Manatee, or, they're close to a national forest. They know that risk is there, and now they're preparing for it.
That's actually, that's very interesting, really smart, because we get asked that question a lot about how do you prepare, resilience, all these words are thrown out, and everyone's in that space, and yet we're struggling in that space all the time as an entire industry. How do you get people to move past their magical thinking where they think what has happened is what will happen? And one of the things that I think that I like so much about Four Leaf is that they do have a lot of experienced disaster professional leaders who've actually walked the community through this. Yep. So there's a level of compassion and understanding that you've walked into communities with us too, that because we're all from survivor communities, the new community that's just gone through this intuitively understands that they don't have to dance for us. We understand the level of devastation and grief that they're going through, but also that we respect their commitment to each other and the place, and that we don't need to be their heroes. We just need to help walk them home. And I think
look what you're doing after the fire with the delegation from Los Angeles that you'll be taking over to Maui in June. Just extraordinary that while Maui is going through this recovery process, their government and their people and their survivors are hosting people from other communities and showing them, look, you're not done yet, but there is progress, there is hope. So to
you
see,
can.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that one of the pieces of reflection I got back from Maui, which is really I attribute to all of us, is we made them feel like they could do it because we know that they can do it. They're doing even better than we thought, and that we had seen before in my eyes. Like they really are, and it's inspirational. And I think that one of the challenges with I think, as every community that goes through a megafire, you have to actually serve the community in front of you, and they all have different personalities and assets and challenges, and things that came before will still be there after. They'll just be somewhat different, and they'll be in reaction and response to what just happened, which means serve the community in front of you, which requires a lot of compassion to do that. And in Los Angeles, one of the goals is that we want them to embrace it's not really embrace the suck, but it is a little bit of that, because they tend to be so judgmental of themselves all the way through and cynical even. And we're like, hey, you actually have to have hope, and you have to have some sort of tragic optimism in your views so that you can do this.
I think back to a couple of visits ago with After the Fire. I mean, I'm over there more frequently now. But getting back earlier to the leadership, the profile and courage that is Richard Bisson. At the end of our time there, he literally closed the circle by bringing us together for Talk Story, and as a cultural example of how I think we should all as Americans be. And as a local leader in Maui, I remember we were over at Earl's house for a wonderful picnic dinner.
Where his house used to be.
Where his house used to be on AstroTurf and sitting around in a circle in garden chairs. And all of a sudden, we weren't people with titles. We weren't Mauian or Anglos from off island. We were just people brought together by a need for community. And he relied, and it didn't matter if you were 4 years old or 40 years old, everybody in the circle had a chance to talk about where we were from their perspective in the recovery process. And it was a way of bringing love and purpose together in our work of public service, whether we were there as private individuals or nonprofit representatives or government officials. And I think back to that evening, to the love and purpose that came out of that every day, as an example of how we should behave as professionals and humans. And I hope in our national discourse and discord and our work here in California, we can practice that more.
Tennis, can you talk to us about the Block Captain program and how did you interface with them and what difference did it make in our recovery?
So Block Captains came about as a response to the 2017 fire and became instrumental in the successive megafires in Sonoma County. So the board, again, going back to earlier in our conversation, became one of the conduits for community communication. And a constructive use of that was block captains. And this didn't break down by any kind of political jurisdiction. It was just more or less organic. It happened in the city of Santa Rosa and in the county. Those distinctions weren't important. But we had one location where we met at one day of the week at one time. So if communication was down, everybody knew that representative for that block or group in their neighborhood could always come there and receive information. And it could be as mundane as garbage delivery is going to start up this date and time in the next week, we think. Or it could be a training session from the local utility on how to have your natural gas service turned back on. and a host of other subjects, depending on what that community needed. So that has been something we've tried through After the Fire, and something that we do as part of our practice at Four Leaf, and bringing those communication networks, those community building networks together.
It's really impactful for those of you who don't know, and we will have more episodes on this too. A block captain is really just this person who's a fire survivor says, I will take responsibility for relaying information from this group of fire survivors who may not have the bandwidth or the ability, or age may be a factor, or many different reasons why. To talk to you. I'll represent this 10 to 100 homes, and I will push out good information to them, especially from the public sector, but also grant opportunities from nonprofits. And then whatever challenges or barriers that they're facing to getting home, they will push that information up to me, and I can take it to leaders like Tennis, who can then figure out how do we remove those barriers constantly. And because the nature of disaster recovery changes very often, as soon as you get it down, it's like, never mind, now learn this new skill. And what it did is that it led to a lot more trust between the community of fire survivors and the government in particular. And I think, and it developed like a working relationship. And we saw that in the city of Santa Rosa, and we saw that in the county, that's how so many of the good projects, including the fence project that we talked about earlier, got done, is because you could address things much more efficiently, and they could actually receive the help, but also have their voices heard. And then they felt like you were walking them home and not just providing yet one more obstacle to overcome. So we do have information on After the Fire. I just updated the block captain process and handout. Always happy to share that. We can actually probably drop the PDF in the show notes. But I just really think that's a wonderful testament to that particular program and the people who started, and also to the leadership of Supervisor James Gore, who I think very much was curious and leaned into that process. So I like that. Actually, that'll take me to my final question, although I could talk to you for a very long time. Well, I'm going to talk to you probably the rest of your life.
Help me, people.
You should be so lucky. What gives you hope, Tennis Wick?
Oh, the experience with fire survivors and seeing people like Lisa in Larkfield Wickiup, fire survivor, lost everything, kept her family together, kept her marriage together. They are just a kick-ass group of people. So what did she do? She became a block captain for another megafire. So the community touch point for the government, for the community in disaster recovery. And then she joined a nonprofit group and is helping outside of her community. And she gave me, when I retired, I hadn't seen her in a while, and I went out in the lobby, and there, she and her husband were standing there with a small olive tree. Because we're both people of faith, and she wanted to celebrate our friendship and our experience together. So her olive tree is growing in our front yard. That's the kind of thing. And it's repeated over and over again, whether it's Courtney and Maui, Amy in Los Angeles. There's just so many good people that I wish more could know, because of what they've gone through in their lives and what they're doing with it. That's just extraordinary.
You know, Tennis, you're one of my favorite people that we work with, and I know my team
Likewise.
feels the same, but I think that I have special dispensation to have like the most affection for you, and I appreciate all the times that you've shown up for After the Fire and for other communities, and thank you. I'm so glad you're with Four Leaf now, because I know that you're bringing all of your heart and compassion and experience and creativity to that role, and I look forward to all of the things that we'll do in the future too, so thank you for being on How to Disaster.
Thank you. It's a blast working with you, Jen.